All right, Mark. Our second Lamplighter Theater dramatic audio, The Basket of Flowers. What are you doing right now? What's going on?
Walter, I'm holding in my hands the very first book that Lamplighter Publishing printed probably about 12 years ago. And it was this book that really changed the course of my entire life. It was when I was reading it to my 12-year-old daughter, Jennifer, and as I was reading, I remember dropping to my knees and crying out to God to help me be the kind of father that this man was in this story, as he so tenderly and gently conveyed the truths to his daughter that were from the scriptures in ways that I've never heard before. Like for example, he says on this one occasion, "Mary, see in these lilies, my child, the symbol of innocence. Its leaves are of whiteness, which outvies that of the richest satin and equals that of the driven snow. Happy is the daughter whose heart is also pure, for it's the pure in heart who shall see God. But the more pure the color, my child, the more difficult it is to preserve it in all its purity. The slightest taint can spoil the flower of the lily, and it must be touched even with the greatest precaution, lest it retain the blemish. Thus also one word, one thought," he said, "can rob the mind of its purity." Looking at his daughter, he said, "Mary, let the rose," said he, pointing to that flower, "be an image of modesty. The blush of modesty is more beautiful than that of a rose, as it rises to the cheek of a modest girl." Mary's father reached down and picked up the lilies and the roses, and he placed them into her hands, and he said, "Mary, these are brothers and sisters. But innocence and modesty are twin sisters and can never be separated. Be always innocent and modest, my child, and you'll always be virtuous. Now, if the will of God be so, may you always be enabled by his grace to preserve in your heart the purity of the lily and the fragrance of the rose." And at that moment, the guards burst into the garden, and they take Mary and they throw her down unmercifully and begin to beat her with whips. You see, the day before, when Mary brought the flowers to the queen's ring was missing, and the maid said that she saw it in Mary's hands, and the penalty for stealing from the queen is death. The judge, he examines her, he threatens her, and he says to her, "If you do not admit to stealing the ring, you will die." And she will not admit it. In fact, she said to the judge, "It is better to die for the truth than to live for a lie, for my father has taught me that the worst pillow to sleep on is the pillow of a guilty conscience." It's even then that the judge says to her, "Then both you yourself will die and your father." She still will not give in because her father has taught her well. And it's even at that moment where she believes that if she doesn't admit to doing this, that her father is going to die. But her father looks at her and says, "I see in your face, sweetheart, the symbol of innocence." Or I see in your face the face of innocence. And she's... And I had never really given that to my daughter, that sense of that I'm behind you, I believe in you, I was always looking for fault and for wrong, and so I read that part, I started weeping, and so now
12 years later, Lamplighter Theater.
12 years later, it's been my desire to someday put this book in radio drama format. And we were over in London. We saw some of the greatest actors speaking their parts for this drama. And I knew then that we had a masterpiece. But when I heard the music that John Campbell did for us, and the sound design that Mark Drury did for us, and the script that Marshall Younger and John Fornoff had adapted for us, Walter, when this all came together, and I heard it for the first time this week, I heard all 4 episodes, I just wept. And the reason I wept was not because of how beautiful the story is, even though it's sensational. But I wept because I believe that for the first time in my life, hearing a story, I believe that I was walking on sacred ground. And the excellence, the skill, the craftsmanship that these men have put into this drama, I believe, is going to be talked about for decades. I believe just as Anne of Green Gables was talked about for decades, I believe this is going to surpass even that. This is a story where a 16-year-old girl has to make a decision. Is she going to be able to trust God and have faith for herself, or is she going to live in the faith of the shadow of her father? And I believe everyone, young and old alike, are going to hear this story, and they're going to be taken back into time and they are going to be confronted with the exact same truth. Will they too, in whatever situation they find themselves in, will they be able to exercise the faith for themselves and believe and trust that no matter how dark and deep and difficult the circumstances are in their life, will they be able to trust in the promise that He will never leave us nor forsake us? This is a story that everyone has to hear or read.
Well, I'm excited to hear it. Can't wait.